Hey everybody, and welcome to the 5 Bytes Podcast. I'm your host, Rory Monahan. Coming up on this week's episode, Microsoft warns some customer logs have been lost. Also, an early version of a ChatGPT app for Windows is now available. And Microsoft has announced new scalable autonomous Copilot agents. For this and more, keep listening to this episode of the podcast, which of course, as always, is brought to you by my sponsors, and that includes Numescent, the inventors of the first and only cloud-native container management platform for Windows desktops, and of course also brought to you by Master Packager, who make an application packaging software that helps you build packages that end users love, enterprises want, and the Windows OS needs. If you enjoy this show each week, you have these awesome sponsors to thank. And now for some news. Kicking off the news for this week, it has been reported by the Record Media that Sophos is acquiring another well-known firm in the security space called SecureWorks, and the deal is reported to be for $859 million. SecureWorks, which is based in Atlanta, focuses on cyber threat detection and response. Sophos said that those capabilities will be used to complement its own products, which obviously span from cybersecurity incident response to network, email, and cloud security technology. Of course, many in our industry have likely used the Sophos endpoint security products too. SecureWorks is currently listed on the stock exchange, where it was trading for about $8.38 a share on Monday morning. The all-cash acquisition will pay $8.50 per share to the current shareholders, and it's expected to close in early next year. Dell owns about 79% of SecureWorks after it was taken public in 2016, so it seems like Dell at least are going to get a considerable payday out of this. Congratulations to SecureWorks, and I hope this acquisition works out in their favor. Microsoft has announced new autonomous agents for Microsoft Copilot with new agentic capabilities, which they claim will accelerate these gains and bring AI-first business process to every organization. To be honest with you, before reading this announcement, I had never heard or seen the word agentic before, and I'll get into that in a few moments. But they say some of the benefits or features that it will bring is the ability to create autonomous agents with Copilot Studio, and that's going to be in public preview next month. And they're also introducing 10 new autonomous agents in Dynamics 365 to build capacity for every sales, service, finance, and supply chain team. Microsoft's article gave some examples of savings made by companies the likes of Thomson Reuters, McKinsey & Company, and more. Plus, Microsoft shared some of their own productivity boosts from deploying AI within the Microsoft organization. Honestly, everything mentioned in the announcement to me seems pretty vague, and the video that comes along with the announcement looks flashy but lacks substance. This announcement struck me pretty similar to Omnissa's event a few months ago, where they made a lot of noise about vague announcements with the promise of more information in future, which is essentially what this announcement seems to be too. It's like, hey, this is coming to preview. There's not a whole lot of technical information here, but you should be excited. Now, I said that I had never actually seen that word or heard that word agentic before, and I assume what this announcement is it's going to be these kind of ready-to-use agents that sound a lot like just chatbots, because generative AI in Copilot really is just a prompt that you can use natural language to initiate and have the bot or the AI agent do something for you. But to hell if I know for sure, because it's not really obvious from this announcement. But, presumably it's bots and agents that you can use for these ready-to-roll use cases like service, finance, and sales, and more, hopefully. So I guess we'll see more once the preview is available. The US CISA has warned SolarWinds customers of a vulnerability that is under active exploitation. The SolarWinds flaw is specifically in SolarWinds Web Help Desk and is tracked as CVE-2024-28987, and it's caused by hard-coded credentials, a username of Help Desk Integration User, and a password of _dev uppercase C4F8025E7. Using these credentials, remote, unauthenticated attackers could potentially access WHD endpoints and access or modify data without restriction. SolarWinds issued a hotfix 4 days after it received a report from Horizon 3.ai researcher Zach Hanley, who discovered it, urging system admins to move to WHD 12.8.3 hotfix 2 or later. There are reportedly over 300,000 customers using the product, according to bleepingcomputer.com. So if you're one of those and you haven't taken this hotfix, get on it. This seems like a really easy one to exploit since the credentials are well known and public. In a follow-up to a story I reported on a previous episode of the podcast, bleepingcomputer.com have expanded on the matter of the North Korean IT workers who have been taking US jobs. They reported cases of those workers stealing data from the organization's networks and asking for a ransom to not leak it. The IT workers used a false or stolen identity and relied on laptop farms to route traffic between their relocation and the company through a US-based point. And if you didn't hear the previous episode of the podcast where I talked about this, there were reports of companies employing remote IT workers who are in actual fact North Korean cyber gang members, and they would avoid video calls during calls or use tricks on the job to hide their faces during video conferences, such as using AI tools. There are also some other US-based employees of companies implicated, where it seemed like they were possibly employing these people themselves to do their jobs for them at a cheaper rate. But then the end goal, it seems, from these North Korean-based cyber gang members was to gain access to these networks and to steal data and then demand a ransom. So it's quite the tangled web. Business Insider has reported that Microsoft have been notifying customers that their logging data had not been consistently collected between September 2nd and September 19th. So quite a stretch of time there. The lost logs include security data commonly used to monitor for suspicious traffic, behavior, and login attempts on a network, increasing the chances for attacks to unfortunately go undetected. BBComputer.com reported that Microsoft said the logging failure was caused by a bug introduced when fixing a different issue in the company's log collection service. And after review, they said some of the services that were impacted, albeit to varying degrees of log disruption, includes Microsoft Entra, Azure Logic Apps, Azure Healthcare APIs, Microsoft Sentinel, Azure Monitor, Azure Trusted Signing, Azure Virtual Desktop, and the Power Platform. Microsoft's corporate vice president John Sheehan said that the bug has now been resolved and that all customers have been notified. However, cybersecurity expert Kevin Beaumont says that he knows of at least 2 companies with missing log data who have not yet received notifications. And to check out a full list of what logs were affected for each of those Microsoft services, I'll share a link with this episode, which is episode 357, and you can find that for yourself at 5bytespodcast.com. AWS has joined the fold with Microsoft and Google, who recently announced their own endeavors into nuclear power in order to meet the growing demand for energy from different AI initiatives. AWS has fronted money for Energy Northwest to study the feasibility of adding small modular reactors to its Columbia generating station, which currently houses a single large reactor. Ars Technica reports that in return, Amazon will get the rights to purchase power from an initial installation of 4 small modular reactors. The site could potentially support additional reactors, which Energy Northwest would be able to use to meet demands for other users. AWS has also struck a deal with another energy provider for a similar endeavor, whilst also providing investment via a round of funding for a company that is responsible for designing the small modular reactors. That contribution to the round of funding is reportedly worth $500 million. So not just significant investment from companies into generative AI platforms and initiatives, but also into power supply for fueling these AI initiatives. BleepyComputer.com shared that Microsoft has been setting up realistic-looking honeypot tenants with access to Azure to lure cybercriminals in to collect intelligence about them. Unlike most honeypots set up by security researchers, Microsoft is using a list of detected phishing sites gleaned from Defender and actively going to those phishing sites, typing in credentials from their honeypot tenants in order to actively get breached and invite the attacks rather than just leaving a vulnerable server sitting in the wind waiting for someone to find it and initiate an attack. They're actively going and seeking attacks by giving these credentials over willingly. Once the attackers log into the fake tenants, which happens in about 5% of the cases, it turns on detailed logging to track every action they take, thus learning the threat actors' tactics, techniques, and procedures. Intelligence collected includes IP addresses, browsers, location, behavioral patterns, whether they use VPNs or VPSs, and what phishing kits they rely on. Additionally, when attackers try to interact with the fake accounts in the environment, Microsoft slows down responses as much as possible. The deception technology currently wastes 30 days of an attacker's time before they realize they've breached a fake environment. Microsoft security engineer Ross Bevington stated that less than 10% of the IP addresses they collect this way can be correlated with data in other known threat databases. Personally, I read this and I thought it was pretty cool, and I figured it was one worth sharing. This kind of work really fascinates me. A worrying report by Google Mandiant shows that out of 138 vulnerabilities disclosed as actively exploited in 2023, 97 of these, or around 70%, were leveraged as zero-day vulnerabilities. This means that threat actors exploited the flaws in attacks before the impacted vendors knew of the bug's existence or had been able to patch them. According to BleepyComputer.com, from 2020 until 2022, the ratio between end days or fixed flaws and 0 days, with no fix available, remained relatively steady at 4 to 6, but in 2023 that ratio shifted to 3 to 7. Google explained that this is not due to a drop in the number of end days exploited in the wild, but rather an increase in zero-day exploitation and the improved ability of security vendors to detect it. This increased malicious activity and diversification in targeted products is also reflected in the number of vendors impacted by actively exploited flaws, which has increased in 2023 to a record 56, up from 44 in the previous year and higher than the previous record of 48 set in 2021. So the security landscape continues to become more hellacious year on year. Radius, which is an open application platform for building cloud-native applications and infrastructure, has just reached its 1-year anniversary. Personally, I'd never heard of it before, but I saw that Mark Russinovich referred to it as the future of cloud-native application development, which seems like a pretty ringing endorsement, so I gave a quick look through their website and through their documentation, and I figured it being 1 year old and getting such a ringing endorsement on its anniversary was newsworthy, so I thought I'd share. Winamp, which was recently published for open source on GitHub, has been pulled from GitHub due to license term issues and several potential open source violations and an inadvertent release of some proprietary third-party code. It seems like the good intentions of the creators to put this open source did not include any real knowledge of what making something open source involves. A pretty glaring omission that they were using code from other third parties that are not necessarily open source and then making that open source. So it'll be interesting to see if they go back to the well on this, kind of reform and then try to make it open source again, or if they're just going to leave it to rest now. But file this one under a big whoopsie. And finally in the news for this week, OpenAI have released an early Windows version of their first ChatGPT app for Windows. Currently, it's only available to subscribers of Plus, Team, enterprise, and education versions of ChatGPT. And users who would like to try it out can download it for free in the Microsoft Store for Windows. But that's it for this episode's news. Let's get on to some scripts, tricks, and tips. Going to keep it short here for this week and just highlight one tip which I saw from the awesome guy Leach. He shared an almost one-liner PowerShell to show open ports in Windows Firewall, and he suggested this may inspire a script in future. And it looks like it's a better, more efficient, quicker way of achieving this than some of the previous tips he shared on this matter. So just a heads up, it's not going to affect anything really, but I am going on holiday next week. So the timing of the next few episodes of the podcast may be a little bit off, but I will endeavor to get new episodes out regardless. But that's it for this week's episode. Thank you so much for listening.